Hello and welcome to the Capital Conversation with me, Michael Hayman. On today's programme, we have a campaigner, innovator and entrepreneur who's focused on tackling one of the world's greatest ever challenges. Because according to the United Nations, up to 43 million people have died worldwide as a result of HIV and AIDS-related illnesses since 1981. But my guest today, Brigette Bard, is on a mission to help create the first AIDS-free generation with her business, BioSure. Now, to tell us more, welcome to the show, Brigette, and tell us a bit about the business. Extraordinary business, loved reading about it.
Yeah, it has.
A genuine mission.
It really has. So BioSure is a UK diagnostics company, and we developed and launched the first approved HIV self-test that uses blood. So that was back in 2015 now.
Right. So frame the test. The test is... You can buy it in Boots, right?
Yeah, in the UK we're in Boots and Superdrug. We sell on Amazon and online, but fundamentally the principal technology is the same as a pregnancy test. So we didn't discover self-testing. All of that was done kind of 30 years ago. But now it's a finger prick test that we've got, incredibly accurate. It's the tiniest drop of blood, and it gives you your own easy-to-read result in 15 minutes. So,
I mean, you're campaigning for an AIDS-free generation. I mean, when you go back to the early 80s, I was a teenager then, and I can remember. I mean, this was something that people were. It was the fear, the dread, the sense of impending doom about AIDS that actually wasn't something that we could get hold of or control. In terms of what's happened since, in terms of the role of science and medicine, I guess what has paved the way for you? Give us a sense of that journey in terms of actually how modern medicine has started to get on top of the issue.
Well, that's the really significant change. So you talk about the early 80s, which is everyone remembers the Tombstone adverts, and there really was a very serious public health threat at that point. There was not very good treatment for HIV. It was a death sentence. Really what's happened in the interim of that is that antiretroviral treatments have become incredibly accurate and really simple now. So the cocktail that you used to remember is now very often a 1 tablet a day regime. And
so you can live a normal life now?
Normal life expectancy, there's incredible data that someone living with HIV and on successful treatment might actually live longer. But the big thing is that when you're on that treatment, not only, so the virus becomes suppressed so that it's undetectable. So your own health's protected, you have a normal life expectancy, but you can't pass it on. And that's the biggie.
But I guess with all of the advantages and the advances in terms of what medicine's been able to do, is I guess the misapprehension that actually this is an issue that's been solved. I mean, actually this is still a major condition. There are major challenges, I guess, surrounding it. In terms of, I guess, the public appreciation of HIV and AIDS as an issue, do we still get it? Do we still have the sense of jeopardy, I guess, in all of this?
Well, I think primarily because it's transmitted, the primary transmission route is sex. So people find it very hard to talk about it, think about it. There's loads of stigma that surrounds it. But the real reason that we still have transmissions is that people don't know their status. So if people do test and do know their status, they're on treatment, and then transmission stops. So all of our messaging and education is don't be afraid of not knowing. You're so much better off to know, because then you're in control.
And in terms of what you found as a business in terms of overcoming that stigma, is there a personal stigma about I don't even want to go and know, I don't even want to take the test? I mean, how do you create public awareness, public acceptance, I guess, actually buy-in that this is the thing to do?
There definitely is a fear inside, and we always kind of pull everything back to pregnancy testing because people understand that and it's established. Quite often people feel guilty or they're upset with themselves, they've done something they wish they hadn't done, and then taking that ownership of testing is a really significant emotional journey.
But I guess if you test positive, I mean, you've got a test that you're doing. You're not doing it in a surgery or a hospital. You're doing this potentially at home. I mean, in terms of actually the support that goes with that, in terms of what's required to actually help people through that process. I mean, is there Is there a tried and tested way now in terms of how support works, in terms of what goes on beyond the test?
Yeah, I mean, when we launched as a world first, there was this scepticism about not only would people want to self-test, but could they self-refer into care? So global algorithm is if you have a positive HIV test, even in a laboratory, you have to have it confirmatory tested. So we've worked with really big stakeholders. We did a very large pilot with the Terence Higgins Trust, looking if people would self-refer into care. And pretty much everyone does on their own time frame. But the thing is, once you've done a test and you know, even if you want to throw it in the bin, ignore it, and I've heard this from numerous people, you know. And human instinct is to survive and own things.
So knowledge is power.
It absolutely is, and we work, whichever country we're operating in, we work with local health systems, we work with local stakeholders, so we're really passionate about how we signpost people.
But you've also talked a lot about role modelling, and the rugby player Gareth Thomas is somebody that you've met, somebody that has inspired you in normalising the conversation. I mean, pick out the story for us.
As you said that, I was really fortunate to meet him recently, and he is an incredible guy.
Remind us of his story.
Well, he's an ex-rugby player. He played for the British Lions. You don't get any higher than that. And he was basically forced to come out about his HIV status, which just is wrong. And the story that he gave was so honest, and he was so hounded by the press. It was obviously it's his status, it's his thing to own. But the day that he released his news, he did an Ironman, and you can't get any better than that. You know, I can't imagine being able to do an Ironman. And he is really driving the conversation through rugby channels, through news channels. He's normalising it. He's showing that you can live very healthily with HIV, be yourself, and it is inspirational, his story.
Tell us a bit about what's driving the business. I mean, is it just about testing, or is it about cure?
Well, we're not involved on the treatment side of things at all, but the route to ending, creating the first AIDS-free generation is about getting people diagnosed, and there are reasons people don't access traditional clinical testing. So we offer another choice. We're not there to replace that, but it could be geographical challenges, self-stigmatisation. So if we get people testing and get them on treatment, then game one.
But 1 million AIDS deaths in 2017. I mean, in terms of actually addressing mortality, I mean, which way are the figures going now?
Well, the actual infection is moving into different age groups. I'm talking on global level now. It's almost 68% of new transmissions are in women, and especially young women. But they're being diagnosed because they get pregnant and have to engage with healthcare. And now pretty much all pregnant women are screened for HIV. Men are not testing. It's asymptomatic. Clinics are a problem to get to during working hours. So the target now is getting men testing and diagnosed as part of a routine health kind of programme.
And do you get a sense, I mean, you've got, by the sounds of it, a great product, you've got a proven technique, but in terms of actually the market's response, the consumer response, it sort of sounds like you've still got a mountain to climb in terms of not only awareness but also acceptance that this is the way to go. This is the way to take control. I mean, what's the trigger that gets you to mass awareness, I guess? Yeah,
it's hard, and we use digital media a huge amount, social media, influencers, because as you say, it's not only the awareness that did you know you can test yourself and get your own result and own the result, but just, it's such a big task. Plus the stigma side of things. So, but now we're in mainstream channels, as you say, in retail and in like Boots and Superdrug. It does normalise things, and people are getting into the routine of repeat testing if you live a life that, you know, puts you at potential exposure. I
mean, and you're moving into other kits, hepatitis B and C, malaria, syphilis. I mean, the list goes on to what you're looking at, even into animal diseases, sort of foot and mouth, and many other. I mean, so many. It's like a hit list of tough diseases and problems.
And a lot of those are only in kind of scoping phase, and you know, just looking at them. But Hep C is a very realistic prospect.
But presumably, I mean, this is where a business like yours is going to make its progress, is addressing the things that we thought were untreatable, uncurable, all those sorts of I guess, taboos that you can address by practical solutions.
Yeah, and I've always been adamant that self-testing is the future, and I didn't really know a lot about the global market, but there's a clinical bottleneck, so there's not enough healthcare professionals for population, and we had this real resistance, especially in some places in Africa. You're stealing jobs, and we're really now allowing people to self-screen so that coming through healthcare are people that need treatment and support, not just a screening process of people that are negative. So there's a really positive shift. I believe everything at some point you'll be able to diagnose at home or self-screen, let's say.
So that's the future.
Yeah.
When we come back after the break, we're going to discuss some of the obstacles, because Brigitte's definitely not one to shy away from a challenge. And we're going to discuss some of those big hurdles that she's had to jump with BioSure's journey. We're going to be right back. Welcome back. My guest today is the founder of BioSure, Brigette Bard. Now, Brigette, before the break, we spoke about the issue and I guess the creation of the business to address it. But I was reading here in terms of the approvals you had to gain legally and from government that there have been so many barriers to bringing them to market that if I'd thought about them all before, maybe I wouldn't have done it. Is it really? I mean, your words, not mine.
No,
I mean,
I recognise them, actually.
Yeah.
Well, when we were a world first, so we came to market via CE marking. And
so tell us what CE marking?
But that's to get the European approval. So there's user evaluations and laboratory evaluations, but nobody had ever done it before. So we had to work through even, not only through the UK, but the European Medical Agency. And we're the highest risk device that's ever come to market. It's HIV and blood and an untrained user.
So a lot of initial risk aversion.
Absolutely.
I mean, how much of that was reasonable, do you think?
I think it was all reasonable, and we were very happy to set the bar as high as we possibly could. But what we've done since then is continue to really accumulate lots of evidence and data proving all the things that everyone was worried about haven't actually come to fruition. So not social harms. People were worried that people, go off and commit suicide. And even with the World Health Organization, that's been proven that that's not the case at all. But regulatory-wise, yeah, it's a lot.
Right. I mean, and do you think the regulators have learned anything through your journey in terms of young entrepreneurial businesses and what it takes to get? Because, I mean, do you count as, what, a medtech business? Or
yeah, we're disruptive medtech.
Disruptive medtech, right, OK. But, I mean, in terms of, a lot of businesses are in your position. They've got breakthrough ideas, technologies, medicines, and so on. But actually, that journey to approval is pretty difficult.
And especially when you're the one forging the path. It has. So we've shared our protocols with lots of agencies, but it is true. Had I been clever enough to know kind of what was ahead, I'm not sure I'd have had the kind of energy to keep going.
To go through with it. Now, Public Health England, I guess, is the institution you've done a lot with lately in terms of its attitude towards self-testing and the availability of the kits on the NHS. They've not been overly supportive, have they? No,
they haven't. And there's a system that they use called home sampling. So you get a test little bottle sent to your home and you send it back to a lab. They just won't accept self-testing as part of kind of their funding system. It's also devolved to local authorities, so it's complicated. But they know we exist. We share all of our data with them. We're happy always to share our data with people. I mean, you've described their decision on this as disgraceful. I mean, do you think they understand why? Well, we do talk to them quite a lot, and there is a strong HIV prevention programme, and I know HIV is not that high on their agenda. There is a committee at the moment that's looking at ways to get us to zero, so hopefully self-testing is back on that table. We're not part of that committee, I have to say. And does it alter around the country? I mean, because obviously health is dealt with differently in Scotland than Wales and England. I mean, do you find that
Northern Ireland. Do you find that actually sort of attitudes shift depending on where you are in the UK?
Yes, yeah, very much. And London obviously has a bigger spend anyway, so London's far more engaged. But we've worked with the NHS and the Martin Fisher Foundation with vending machines down in Brighton. We've done some fabulous stuff with Public Health Scotland and the Waverley Centre. They're much more pro-change.
So Scotland's more pro-change?
Yeah, they've been really good. And much easier to work with.
Now much has been made of the NHS and the adoption of technology, I guess not least because the Secretary of State is an avowed technology fan. In terms of actually the practicalities of that, in terms of creating a tech-friendly NHS, what would you score it at the moment in terms of its adoption rate?
I think
it's a deep sigh.
That was terrible. I didn't mean to make it that deep. It's just so long. The changes take so long to implement, and there are reasons behind that. I was told that we're a speedboat and they're a tanker, and we can't just dive in.
So
and
you're a
out
speedboat,
of
they're a tanker,
yeah,
right? Okay.
But I mean, I don't think they're against technology, but it takes a long time to get into the system.
And to some degree, the growth of the success of your business relies on actually very productive relationships, positive relationships with the regulators.
It does, and every country that we go into has very strict regulations, but this is one of the main reasons that we've pushed into the consumer market, because we were talking before about how we kind of educate and communicate. Grassroots level, people do want to do this, they do want to own it, they want to be able to buy it, own their result and do their own test.
Do you get the sense that, I mean, you're working all over the world with this, I mean, how to what degree does the UK get it? To what degree do the regulators you're dealing with compared to other countries? I mean, is this a particularly sort of poor example of getting it, or do they get it better than others?
Yeah, I think here it's good because there's a policing mechanism. So there were lots of unregulated tests that were already available online when we launched, and the MHRA one by one kind of closed them off. In countries like Germany, there doesn't seem to be anyone policing it. We have the same situation in South Africa. So some countries, everyone has regulations, but some are good at policing them and others aren't, and the UK is very strict on that. So it's a good thing to keep the bar high for sure.
Now, let's go back to the business, because after listening to you speak, if you told me you were a scientist, if you were telling me, but actually your background, you're a broker, you're an entrepreneur, I mean, you're looking at this very much as a business. But what gets you from the world of broking to BioSure?
Oh my goodness. Well, the plastic technology that we utilise, we didn't invent. And as I say, the opportunity came up and it's like, well, it's like a pregnancy test, but for diseases. That's a no-brainer. I mean, that's why.
What got you personally interested in that? I mean, I get how it works, but I mean, was there a kind of light bulb moment? I mean,
that makes me sound like a genius, which I'm not. But I did think, how can people not get this? And I was introduced through, I know lots of people kind of all over the world, and through some people that I knew in New York and working with a kind of team of brokers there, said, you know about this, we need to find someone. It's like, wow, okay, this is really interesting.
So you saw this as, first and foremost, this is a market and an opportunity to grow an idea and come up with a solution, but you made that fundable. You've taken on external funding as part of that. I mean, what's been the journey of the entrepreneur in terms of what you've learned about yourself in scaling the business?
Well, we always talk about blood, sweat and tears because it's it's literally that. Because of the regulatory hurdles and the product development that we go through, there is so much upfront cost. So funding is a really key part to keep growing it. And now we're expanding into other territories. We're sprinting to try and keep up with ourselves.
And do you need patient investors? I mean, is this a business that can show the required promise quickly, or is this something that
you need to have a degree of patience because we're having to prove a concept. Nobody even knew that they wanted to self-test for HIV, so one by one we're convincing them. But honestly, at grassroots consumer level, we just don't have any resistance. When you say to people, "Do you know about this?" they go, "Oh, no, really? Where can I get one? Like, can I buy it?" It's really like that.
But in terms of building a business like this, presumably you've got a lot of very expensive, clever people in that
yeah,
business.
there are some. There are some. My clinical director is amazing, and my chairman, who also mentors me, a man called Sir Nigel Knowles. I could not have made this journey without him. He's extraordinary.
I mean, in terms of actually assembling that from, I mean, a lot of people will be listening to this as startup entrepreneurs wanting to scale. In terms of how you assemble that kind of, I guess, winning squad, what are the lessons, do you think, in terms of how you've been able to do it?
I think we're really fortunate because we're in HIV and we have social impact and we have tangible social impact. We're making a difference.
So there's a mission, there's a cause.
Yeah, a cause. And so we attract some amazing people who really do support us. And we've always had, or certainly tried to have this vision of creating a credible brand that everybody trusts, that they can self-test with. So the end journey, which is goodness knows how far in the future, has been there since the beginning.
And does that, I mean, in terms of the big goal, the AIDS-free generation, I mean, is there a team of people that work with you that think that's what mission accomplished means for us?
Yeah, everyone in my team truly believes that, and we have to work. I mean, we're always on restricted budgets. We're not some super huge multi-billion corporation, so we work with activists, we work with influencers. It's all about that messaging, about taking control, own your status, know your status, be in charge.
And as a young business that's scaling, when you look at the next chapter, you look at the obstacles and opportunities ahead. What sort of What's the dream and what keeps you awake at night?
Everything keeps me awake at night. I think running out of money and running out of time are the two big things. There's not enough hours in the day, and we can always do with more money. So plugging into additional distributors now, and even going through the legals, the due diligence, the regulatories, everything. It's like, come on now.
And if presumably you have to find new things about yourself in terms of stamina and perseverance and resilience.
Yeah, it's like a roller coaster kind of journey, but yes, it is. Dig deep, and we always say, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time, and you have to remind yourself of that sometimes when it becomes overwhelming.
As a tea time show, I think eating the elephant one bite at a time feels like an appropriate time to leave it. Thanks so much for sharing your story.
Thank you for having me.
That's all we have time for this week, and thanks to my guest, Brigette Bard, the former broker breaking all precedent to tackle one of the world's greatest issues, HIV and AIDS. BioSure is at the forefront of the health tech innovation in the UK and indeed across the world. A founder who's overcome immeasurable challenges to put her solutions to the market. And if you're looking for more inspiration from the entrepreneurs on that front line of change, join me next time on The Capital Conversation. I'll see you then.